Hello, folks. It's your friend Bernie here for this week's edition of the Co-working Values Podcast. And this is a conversation between our friend Ashley, who you will know for founding Co-working Canada, the Co-working Idea Project, and collaborates on the Co-working Alliance with Hector. Where to begin? So this is a conversation which is all about co-working, and you might have to look a little bit harder and go, what is this about co-working? And in this edition, Ashley talks to her friend Nilu about the whole situation of oppression in Iran, and Nilu lives in Canada, and she talks about how being in Canada and watching what's happening in her home country makes her feel what she thinks about what is happening, the trauma and the triggers around it, and why this is like super interesting. I listened to this so many times is because very often we walk in a context of co-working. We walk into our co-working spaces and we see lots of people and we're like friends with them and we don't really know what's going on with them. But then whether we ever say anything or not, we can be supportive of people. We don't need to know everything that's going on with people, but we can be supportive of people, but also we should be aware of other things that could be going on with people. So many times, London is where I grew up in and where most of my co-working experience is. There are people in and out of London all the time, on holiday, traveling. They've had to flee their country because of economic disasters, war, environmental disasters, oppression. And very often you're sitting in a room with a whole array of people with a whole load of things going on. And also people who, are just Londoners that have dire situations in their own environment. And there's a lot in here about, like Neela talks about, she reflects about her traumatic upbringing in Iran and how recent events trigger those memories. And she highlights the bravery of the young generation. And why I wanted to post this is because, there's so much going on in the world at the moment. And, I myself get intoxicated by beautiful co-working spaces and, gadgets and stuff like that. But there's a whole, something happening in the world right now. And Ashley and Nunu discussed the importance of guiding and supporting each other and the next generation and navigating issues. One that seems to be never stopping at the moment is government interference, bots, misinformation, fake news and stuff like that. And, in the UK, there's a lot of stuff that happens. I've never seen this so bad in the UK. There's a lot of stuff that happens that just doesn't make the news. And there's a theme that runs through this, and a lot of stuff we talk about here is the oppression and the lack of agency experienced by women in many societies. And that is I'm not even going to attempt to explain that, but that is another theme in here. So that happens in Western society and in places like Iran. So I made that sound really, really heavy, didn't it? But it's very interesting, very inspirational. And I think the message to take from this is, pay attention to where you get your news from and take care of each other and be excellent to each other. Let's get into the episode. Thanks for listening.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this month's Co-working Idea Challenge. My name is Ashley Proctor, and I am with Co-working Canada and the Co-working Idea Project. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Co-working Idea Project, this organization is an informal collective of collaborative consultants and co-working operators and community organizers and advocates, and we are working together to make sure the co-working industry and movement remains inclusive, diverse, equitable, and accessible. And we work together on systems change and social justice issues around the world. This month, we're doing something a little bit different with our challenge. So we're going to invite you into a conversation that we're going to have with our guest, Nilo. And we're going to craft a challenge for you to experience. So before we dive right in, I'd like to ask our guest, Nilu, to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about who she is and what she does. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. And a little bit about myself. My name is Niloufar Salimi. I was born and raised in Iran, and about 20 years ago, I came to Canada. And because I had this opportunity of starting over, I left all of my studies behind and started over to study art and kind of experimenting something that was very new to me. And ever since, I have been practicing art and working in the art scene, teaching art, and try to be involved in the small and large communities in Toronto. And again, I live in Toronto, Canada. And what else I can talk about? That something related to this month's challenge is that when you immigrate somewhere, when you leave your home, you become a spectator to what you left behind, and many things happens, many things evolves, many things changes, but you continue watching it from afar and analyze it with the filter that you developed when you were there. So it feels like kind of unjust way of analyzing it, but that's all we have in hand when we move out of a place of familiar space, or the only space that you lived. And a few months ago, last September, to be exact, about 300 days ago, a young girl was killed in the custody of morality police in Iran. And following that event, there was a lot of protest. There was a lot of dangerous moments for people of Iran who supported the protesters. And ever since I was born, and I was born after Iranian Revolution, but ever since I was born, there were so many protests happening in Iran, and I was always a spectator as a child, as a teenager, as an adult. And this time, even though I was way far away from home, this time was very different than before, as if it touched something very, very close to my heart, as many other Iranians inside and outside of Iran. And should I stop the introduction here? Maybe we can cover the rest in our conversations. So I just wanted to position myself where I am in the middle of it and how I feel watching it from a very long distance.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible introduction and some important context for folks who haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet. And I've known you for quite a while. It's been longer than a decade now. We actually met through the Artist Studios at Creative Blueprint in Toronto many years ago. And I've been following you and your work since, and I really have a lot of respect for the work that you do, and also admiration for your dedication to the craft, as well as it feels like a constant journey of learning and like always challenging yourself and broadening your understanding of things in your art, in your work, and in these topics that you're so passionate about. And so I'm really grateful to have you with us today and to know you and to be able to have a conversation about something it's a very vulnerable topic to discuss and a place to share from. And it's a challenging and tragic situation. And there's so many different pieces.
Sides to it.
Yeah, sides and pieces and layers. And I'm excited that we can talk about that a bit more today. So thank you. Yeah, I guess perhaps to start, we could give some folks a bit more context just on maybe, the last 300 days and what sparked this recent round of protests and in the issue in a bit more detail, just to give people some context. And then we could maybe just go through your experience and like how you were receiving news and how you felt through that time being here in Canada while everything's going on.
One of the things that was very traumatizing, again, when I use the word traumatizing, I'm not comparing the trauma that I'm going through with people of Iran. I'm only using the words in context of a spectator, not someone who's experiencing the events herself. So one of the traumatizing things 300 days ago was to receive very, very immediate news through social media. And then, so because of the time differences between Tehran to Toronto, many of those events happened when we were asleep in North America. So we would be waking up, checking our phones constantly, and receiving tragic news that could have happened to us. It could have happened to anyone, could have happened to any of the loved ones. It wasn't targeting any specific person for any specific reason. It could have been anyone. And so that's how I was receiving the news. And you know how news has changed since social media, and it has good things about it and bad things about it. In a dictatorship, it can really serve people to take their voices out, and that was happening in Iran, and it was coming out. But after a while, because all of those news didn't have I felt like we needed some news literacy to trust all of those news sources, like who is telling this story, and then why are we watching all of these tragic videos? And it was so violent. It was another level. And one of the things that I realized watching all of these true or exaggerated or isolated news, however we want to conclude after watching any videos, one of the things that I realized was how much violence I was exposed to during my life in Iran. And I ignored it. I kind of repressed it to back of, and again, I'm not comparing those with the current events, but it was just bringing my childhood trauma to surface, and to this surface that I have never ever allowed my conscious to look at it. So it was traumatizing in a way that I realized I did not have a calm life, because I always was under the impression that I had a good life, I had a calm life, I was never, nothing was violated. But then I realized, oh my goodness, it's just how mind protects our beings, our mental health. And this is just, and again, these are all because of survival. And thank God I did that. Maybe during those ages, during like those brackets of age, I really needed to survive and not think about violence. And so that was one of my realization, that true or not true, isolated or not isolated, these things are happening in Iran. And people are being so closely exposed to it. And the boundaries of personal life and private life has been eliminated, basically. No one has the safety of privacy. No one has the safety of private life. And the funny in a very bad way thing is that in Iran, people have two lives, very private one and public one. And the public one quite often is a very pretend way of living, because you have to survive in public. So your public identity is very different than your private one. And imagine, not only so you really, really protect that private life because it's very different. So I was just experiencing it and imagining myself in a younger age, because I really can't imagine myself there, because I don't have experience of Iran at this age, which could be very different. So I kept imagining myself in a different age being exposed to this. And one of the things that I really, really want to mention today is how the next generation after me, like my children's, I don't have children, but the next generation after me, how they look at life very differently than I do, or my generation, or most of my generation do. It's just as if we were the master of protecting that private life, and or master of the pretense in public. But the next generation are not doing that. And for any circumstance, there are so many ways of explaining it psychoanalytically, and it's understandable why the generation before these master of pretense they can do that. But it's just stunning to see these very young people risking their lives just because they don't want to have two different lives. And it's admiring, and I am forever thankful of their bravery, and however we can find reasons for their bravery, but it's just amazing. It's amazing how they, for a very personal level for me, they broke a wall that I never ever, even in my imagination, could think, or anywhere, I was not able to think that this wall can fall. And they made it fall in my head, and it gave me a different way of looking at life. So I will be forever thankful.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. I'm so grateful that you're here to share all of this firsthand with us. It's really powerful stuff. And I think you've touched on a lot of really important topics. And this is why I thought that this discussion with you would be so important to have in this setting, because I think there are a few things that you brought up. One was, excuse me, exposure to violence, and like knowing or unknowing, and the returning to how we used to think of things, and revisiting childhood traumas and the triggering. All of this is happening while you are here in Canada and safe. And as a Canadian without a history of a connection to another country, or without being still deeply connected by roots to another place, we wouldn't have the perspective or even the mindset to understand how deeply connected you are to what's happening there, even though you are technically not going through the same trauma or experience. And you mentioned that, of course, it's not the same experience or the same trauma that folks obviously are having, fighting and protesting on the front lines and living through it, living through history in the making.
Yeah.
But that trauma is real. That's real. that's real trauma and real triggers and real work that you need to do and real emotional labor. And so I do want to acknowledge that as significant and substantial, even though it isn't the same as what people might be experiencing on the ground in the middle of a conflict like this and an ongoing struggle. Also, you touched on social media as a tool. And I think that that's also a really key topic now that we're thinking about Twitter and these new apps and communication channels and what used to be, in some cases, the only way to organize or for activists to connect and mobilize or to get real news or information out in a crisis or a situation. But you very importantly and early on flagged the literacy required to be able to decipher between some of the misinformation or manipulation or very intentional, what's available and what's not, thanks to different levels of government and free speech. So that's a huge topic I think should be front of mind now too, as we're going through all these shifts with platforms and things.
Especially when you are emotionally exhausted, those triggers in social media, those tweets that they are purposefully put there to, I don't know, to motivate people to go out on the street, for example, either to achieve something or either go to be killed. Who knows who's writing those stories? And when you're emotionally charged, you believe way more quickly. And again, I was sitting, as you mentioned, somewhere safe, somewhere sound, and yet I was judging all of these things that were happening. And then 15 days later, I would realize that, that was purposefully out there to trigger people, to make people fight with each other. So again, in this situation, there are so many different beliefs, so many different angles, so many different followers of different political parties or political beings or non-political beings. So, and what the actual power wants for those not to unite. And it's so complicated, and people, including myself, we get involved in those games. They're not games, but sort of. So it's just, it was amazing that in those moments, I was not able to decide what's happening. I was just being part of what was happening very passively and judging or deciding if that story is true or non-intentional. And later we would realize, right. So it's really, really important for all of us, not for this specific thing, to have news literacy. And I hope we invest in it to work on ourselves to learn how to do that. Because like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, news literacy was judging, for example, I'm just using as an example, judging why BBC is saying this story this way and CNN broadcasting the same story in a different way. But now it's like a million different voices out there, and we don't know them. We don't have a stereotype or definition of what CNN is or what BBC is. It's just, it's mind-blowing, I guess, or I don't know, I'm getting old. Maybe younger people don't have my problem.
I think it's a really important thing to highlight, especially like as we are sort of transitioning from being the first generation to experience all of this to a space where we could potentially help to guide or help the next generation navigate these things. We've seen them become real in our lifetime. We've seen bots, and we've seen governments try to interfere in elections, and we've seen misinformation on both sides. And And I think too, as we are more aware of some of these issues and different activist causes and advocacy work around the world, we see that a lot of these protest experiences, a lot of these tactics are very similar. And so we learn from this experience, and we need to apply that to the next sort of attempt at overthrowing the independence and the autonomy that people are fighting so hard for. That's that agency and all the rights and responsibilities we do have were fought for and earned by people before us. And it's a duty and on our part and the next generations to continue to educate ourselves and to keep up that fight, or else those rights and they tend to disappear. And we're seeing that around the world. We're seeing that in this case. We're seeing that in the United States of America with women's rights. And so this isn't an isolated issue. It takes different forms in different countries. And so I think there's also something to be said for the oppression and the lack of agency that women have in many societies, and what we're doing as individuals or organizations to dismantle those restrictions and to also empower and provide equitable situations to make sure that women are catching up and that there isn't such a gap in everything from earning to just the ability to speak freely and be in control of their bodies and their lives.
Yes.
We've had this conversation before, and so I know that we're so aligned on many of these issues and perspectives, and I do appreciate that. I also want to sort of pull out a thread about what you mentioned about the youth movement, and that being so hopeful, and that really is true to me too. It rings true for the other movements and land back movements and indigenous-led movements more locally. And I'm watching a lot of women and non-binary trans-led movements that are really gaining momentum and being very powerful and impactful at the youth grassroots level. And I think we were talking about before too, how that social media and these other platforms and technology and things are also allowing younger generations to organize and empower and fund and create networks and find each other and networks of support and safety and legal help and all kinds of things that weren't possible even 5 or 10 years ago. How did you see that sort of playing out in this situation?
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to imagine, because when I left Iran, I was 19, and very, very different youth. I was again, it was just me. I'm not saying all of the generation was like that, but again, I speak only through my own experiences, and never rebel. But when I see what the youth has achieved past almost a year ago, or I don't know how to. I'm limiting it to the past 300 days ago, but it's not that it all of a sudden it happened. It's been happening through time. But they have achieved so much in these 300 days. And I cannot even, again, I can't imagine how they're doing it. They're 14, 15, under 30 people. And it's amazing how it seems like, this is again through my spectator's eyes, it seems that they have decided that they are going to live the way they want, and the government has to catch up. and they know the price that they are paying, not will be, but they are paying. They have to pay that. How many people have been killed very unjustly for absolutely no reason? No, I don't know, there are reasons, but not good reasons. And especially through the eyes that we look at life, they want a very simple, normal life. That's compared to the lives that we have. And they're getting killed for it. So it's just, that's my explanation for no reason. And it's just all I can say that this specific generation came, the circumstance is very interesting because the previous generation before me did the 1979 revolution. They were very involved. They were young. They were in their 20s, late teen to their late 20s. And they failed. They end up with a very fake republic that is another form of a dictatorship. But again, these are my understanding of of all of this through my life. And the previous generation sacrificed a lot. They lost their friends, they lost their siblings, whoever survived it. They lost, especially women, they lost a lot of human rights. They had to cover very specifically to rules of the government. They have to stop working in certain areas. They have to, I don't know, culturally many things happened. The rights of life changed. For example, in Iran, if someone, I don't want to go through it. It's all on internet. You can read it. But inheritance law, for example, or other things that you can measure how a woman's life is worth half of a man's life, for example. And these things, they lost all of that within a year and a half. And they protested. For example, the first March 8th after revolution, all women protested. It was a huge protest that it shouldn't happen, but it happened, as it happens in any dictatorship. And the second generation, which was my generation, we grew up through an extreme pressure of the government wanted to produce a very moldable generation, that they can create this thing, this 20 million youth. I don't know, I think the supreme leader once mentioned the army of 20 million youth, something. So they were thinking to mold all of these new born people to what they want. And that was a lot of pressure, a lot of planning, but they didn't know that we were in homes of people who did the revolution, and they did not have that. So we learned how to pretend and have a private life. And then the next will come our children's generation, that we didn't want the same life that we had for them. So the circumstance brought this brave and beautiful generation who's is not afraid the way we were afraid. And I know that they didn't have the same lives as we did, but their bravery, it's admirable. And it breaks my heart when they say we don't have anything to lose. We don't have anything, period. So we fight for Freedom is such a charged word here in North America, and sometimes people use liberty, but I don't know what to use. None of them works in that situation. But for a youth to think that they don't have anything and they would sacrifice whatever is left to have what they want is, I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine it, but I believe them. I don't think they're pretending. I don't think they are fooling anyone. That's how they feel, and they're losing their eyes in protests. They're losing their siblings, their friends, if they survive, if they don't die. So that's huge.
Yeah, I feel particularly moved by that because I see so many of the similarities in other movements around the world, and that the contrast, and also the sort of being able to hold space for both how long it takes for change to really happen over generations. And it took sort of that silent, like secretive formation to allow what's happening now. So even though it might not have been outward change, inward, people were changing their minds and their beings, their families, their inner thinking, before it can be, another generation can outwardly live those values and dreams. And it takes that courage of an entire generation. I'm also really feeling what you're saying about people not having anything to lose, and the echoes that we hear from Indigenous people and our BIPOC friends and family, trans folks, LGBTQ folks. There's so many people who are similarly feeling like the only thing left to do is fight, and there isn't a lot left to lose. And I see this with environmental and climate activists as well, particularly this summer as the world is on fire. This kind of like there's either a huge losing of hope, or perhaps a movement to change. We don't have time to waste. We don't have time to wait, and change is actually possible in such a very short period of time with the right conditions and the right support, and also the right connection and media and ability to claim their own narrative and have their own voice be heard through all of this change. So I think this conversation to me really touches on so many different pieces of our work, and I'm just so grateful for you being able to talk us through all of this, especially again, as it's something that really takes a lot of vulnerability and courage to talk about from such a emotional and powerful place. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm going all over the place. I feel like my mind just travels in all directions sometimes. So if I'm bringing up too many things, like warn me.
No, I think this is exactly what we were hoping to display, because I feel like there are a lot of intersections. It's like a web, and there are so many points of connection between different activists and different issues and different movements. And in the same way that that movement is very personal to you and very local for the folks on the ground, very relevant because of all the historical context, it just echoes a lot of the struggles we see around the world. And I feel like it also gives us a better understanding of some of those perspectives, particularly just how involved and traumatized, but how much something back home can impact you while being here. And so I imagine, you're going to work, you're working in your art studio, you're around friends and family, and yet, behind the scenes, all of this is going on. And again, not a lot of folks are asking you when you come into work, like, how are you doing? I know there's something going on at home. So I'm hoping that this will also give folks pause to think about perhaps the members in their co-working communities and spaces, and the people on their teams at work, and their friends and people in their community who might not outwardly be showing it, but are 100% tied back home, thinking about the issues and the struggles and the politics and the conditions, because it's still so close to your heart and a piece of you.
Yeah. You spoke of communities. I've been lucky working with very empathetic people. But of course, life goes on and we're not 24/7 involved in that pain. So it gets kind of diluted in everything else. But living in Toronto had this amazing opportunity I had this amazing opportunity because the Iranian diaspora is very big in Toronto. And at the beginning, last September through December, I think maybe even longer, every weekend there was a protest. And thank God we live in a country that allows protests. And so even though I didn't know any, although I might have come across some friends during the protests, but many thousand other ones that I had no clue who they were, but that collective pain and being with people that somehow not particularly exactly the same, but somehow we were sharing some pain, and it was really helpful. So even though the level of empathy or depth of the empathy is not deep, but just being with other people really helped. And that was very, and when I went to all of those protests, I never thought of why am I going this? This will not help anybody in Iran, or if it did or if it didn't, it had to happen. As if it's like making art. You have to make art, even though you don't know if anyone will see it or if anyone care that you did, but it has to happen. And that was exactly the same. It had to happen, and it had its benefit of being with others with similar pain or they had the empathy. Or some of my non-Iranian people came to some of the protests, and it was so touching. And they're by just being there, by positioning their body in that protest was helpful. Yeah.
Oh, I think we should leave it there. I think ending on the power of community is a good way to wrap this conversation up today. And there's a lot of ways we can support each other emotionally, financially, even just, like you said, using our bodies to be able to be there and show support. I do think that those protests had an impact, and I think in the healing for sure, and in the community, like you said, but also awareness for folks like me who aren't directly tied into local media, who can't translate very efficiently or quickly. And I'm getting a lot of secondhand or thirdhand or fourthhand information without the context. And so to actually be directed towards our local community as people who are well connected and well informed about what's happening back home, that's a gift to all of us. And I think that awareness is very powerful. And thanks for using your body in that way too.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for listening.
Yeah, really appreciate you, Nilu. Love you lots. And I really am so grateful for your time and vulnerability.
It's mutual. Thank you so much.
Thanks. And for everyone else watching, you can find resources and materials and the blog posts on the coworkingidea.org website. And if you want to follow up, or if you would like to make a donation to an organization, we're going to have a link there for you as well, so that you can help support some folks on the ground as well. You can check out the initiatives online. Everything's going to be in the blog post at coworkingidea.org. Thanks so much.
Thank you.